All right, folks, let's just run through just a quick welcome to everyone who's here. Just wanted to give a shout out to our founders and our members and ambassadors, and we have a few guests here in Zurich and a whole bunch online. What's interesting about our community is it comes from a huge range of folks, ranging from very commercial organizations through civil society, ecosystems, nonprofits, individuals who are interested in what it is that we're doing. And just, thank you to everybody who's here and who's been supporting us along this incredible journey we've been on. As we go through the agenda, so you're going to see a couple people dropping in and out. We actually have our partner DDAS, the identity group in Switzerland, is having a meeting down the hall. So you might find people are coming in and out. We may have some other guests drop in. Some of them are coming on the train back from Davos, and we'll see if they have time to come in. But what we're going to do is I'm going to cover off kind of an introduction to Ayra, cover off a variety of topics there. And then Drummond and I are going to speak about the Ayra white papers, the 4 papers that we dropped last Thursday when we unveiled the Ayra brand. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the themes at Davos. And then we're going to get into a panel discussion. We've got a number of folks on the line who are panelists that are remote, as well as a few that are here in Zurich. And we may have a few people drop in that should be interesting if it happens. The reason we got this whole GAN initiative started, which really is Ayra now, you'll see that the logo changes as we go through this, is that trust has been plummeting globally. I'm going to move, sorry, I got to move the, I had the video thing along the side that was blocking my slides. So trust has been really dropping. It's been really burning down. And groups have been spending a lot of money trying to figure out, why is this happening? Why can't I do what I want to do? And as trust is dropping, it's not working. But we continue to see that risk and compliance costs for corporations, organizations, whether you're for-profit or not, continue to rise, and AI is like pouring gasoline on the fire. It's just accelerating how things are kind of decaying. What we've recognized with Ayra is that a problem of this magnitude, we can't solve it alone. There's no single organization on the planet that can solve this. We have to work together. That means working with folks that we're partnered with, folks that are our peers that we are competing with, frenemies, if you will, as well as with our customers, the individuals that are involved. And what we're doing here is really trying to build and sustain trust, because it's important, it's critical for every business. And whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit, and just living your life, trust is fundamental to what it is we do. And we know we have to have multi-stakeholder solutions that really gather the best of the thinking that's out there, the best of the existing and real capabilities, but also what's missing, what else do we need? So we really know we knew we needed a forum that serves to create a network effect to start building more and more and more momentum that really lean towards and restore digital trust. So this is, for those who haven't seen it, this is Ayra. We met many people in Davos who'd heard of GAN, did not know about Ayra, so we used this message quite a bit while we were there. Really, we are a community of first movers, the trailblazers, that are leaning into recognizing there is a way forward and they want to be involved in the earliest of days. Our job is to be a neutral facilitator, to bring together the strategic partners who are working to collaborate and find solutions to all these trust problems. What I wanted to cover off when we were going through multiple different groups, they're asking, well, what does Ayra mean for me? And down the road, we're going to have a trust mark, much like we see, Visa, Amex, MasterCard, all these logos that mean something. We know what to do when we see a Visa card, we see a Visa sign in the store, we know how to use that. We want to get to the point where Ayra, this is a down the road thing. When the Ayra trust mark means something. So as an individual, what it'll mean is that I know that the people and organizations that I'm working with are who they say they are. And that when I'm dealing with folks with applications and companies that have the Ayra trust mark, that the things will just work. They'll be compliant. I don't have to worry about how do I go from Signal to WhatsApp? I can't. But also when I'm asked for information, whether that's private or not, I know who I'm sharing it with and that they've agreed to respect the rules of the network and that I've agreed to participate on that. And we'll know we succeeded when we get to the point when I don't see the Ayra trust mark, that I start to back up and take a moment and question what is it I'm about to do? If I'm about to give my, scan my passport or do a selfie passport with someone who's not part of this movement, what's going on? Maybe it's okay, but it could also be just a sign that we're working with someone who's got, doesn't have my best interests at heart. For business, it really means the IRA means that I can conduct my business knowing that the folks involved are who they say they are, that they're also following the governance and business rules that we expect. And as I build out my business, I don't have to go and build the networks myself necessarily. I can tap into the ecosystems and networks that already exist. That is a huge savings because we tend to build these our own version of what is reality, and it costs a lot and it's not reality. We just want to tap into the groups that are already, forming their own ecosystems and are really appropriately in charge of them. One of the things we were working on in Davos was, what does IRA mean for governments? Because we want to make sure the governments understand that we're not here to replace, we're here to augment and reinforce the roles of government and enable them. We'll be talking more about that, especially as we talk about the Swiss EID system later on the panel. But the goal is that governments will know as they work with IRA, or their citizens and companies work with IRA, that their authorities and policies are being respected, that their citizens are being treated fairly and consistently, and the businesses that are operating under their jurisdiction are playing on a level playing field and they understand what's going on. Just quickly, what we've accomplished in 2024, we started the efforts as GAN. I guess we're just over a week old with the name IRA. But we established the IRA Association last month in Zurich, just not too far from where I am at Trust Square in Zurich. We also passed the first governance framework for IRA, which was passed by the GAN Member Advisory Council, which is a pretty unique for those who don't know what it is. The Member Advisory Council was a combination of the commercial members who joined GAN, mapped 1-to-1. So there were 19 on the one side, there were 20 on the other side of the GAN ambassadors, who are individuals who carried the role of bringing forward very different perspectives from all over the globe, ranging from individual rights, indigenous rights in various different places. And it was a really, really incredible experience going through that member advisory process. And these really lay down the foundations for creating and governing the IRA Trust Network, which I'll talk a tiny bit about in a moment. That's just a shot of us in the actual commercial register in Switzerland here. So the governance framework, the way this works is we have the IRA Association and we have the IRA Trust Network. The IRA Trust Network really is a collection of ecosystems. Call them networks if you like, a network of networks, an ecosystem of ecosystems. It's meant to be truly interoperable. The IRA Association's job is to govern that, to make sure that we understand on a business, governance, and technical level what it means to be part of that IRA Trust Network. The goal is that many, many ecosystems will connect. Many of these ecosystems already exist or are forming right now or want to form. Our goal in the short term really is to get a few participating ecosystems in and then grow to many, hundreds, thousands of these independent and sovereign ecosystems. We're not here to tell them what to do. We're here to say, here's a thin layer of what you need to do to connect to the IRA Trust Network, which enables a ton, but also saves you a ton of costs. So who is part of IRA? Some of these logos popped up earlier, but I wanted to speak to a few of them. Andre Kudra from ESATIS is right here. I mentioned DDAS. They're having their meeting down the hall. We've got numerous members here. Jen Drummond has been assigned by Gen Digital, has been contributed as an individual to IRA. He's been working with us full time for 4 months. As we go through, I'll go through a few. So Gen Digital is a huge consumer cyber safety company. Pearson, David Treat, and I were spending quite a bit of time in Davos, both talking about where Pearson is going, how it wants to set up an education cluster, what it's doing, and why it needs the Ayra Trust Network in order to really achieve its mission, because it knows it can't control everything. We have Accenture. They weren't able to make it. Unfortunately, flights and weather caused flights to get even worse, and we lost two of our panelists. But we'll speak a little bit to what they're working on. We've got Affinity based out of Singapore. There are a identity company funded by Temasek, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. NTT Digital, we met up with in Davos. They are part of the NTT group, focused on decentralization technologies. And Fragaman is a very large law firm that you may never have heard of. They actually claim that on stage. They work solely on immigration and travel. And I like using them as an example because they're not a tech company. They're not a systems integration company. They're not a consultancy. They're a law firm that's job is to work with their clients, who are typically Fortune 1000, to help their people move around the globe. And they operate in 170 countries. They help people travel, do business travel, but they also help people immigrate. And what the trend is that they're seeing is governments are rapidly going through a phase of they've been trying to digitize for many, many years, and it's finally happening, which is accelerating how fast government can move on things like, are you compliant and are you allowed to enter a building, and or should I find out that you weren't allowed here and I will audit and fine you because you haven't been compliant. What they're seeing is a rapid acceleration of going from analog paper to fully digitized big data and analytics and AI, taking the odds of audit going up. If you're in a particular industry, it could go up instead of like 10%, we're looking at 10 to 20x. So they're seeing a huge shift right now. Now, one of the questions we get is, why did the GAN founders, the Ayra founders, invest? And there's a few different reasons. Most of them have problems that they have to fix that need somewhere neutral, or there are opportunities that they cannot reach because they need somewhere neutral to do the work. You can't do a platform play in this world. There'll be lots of platforms in the Ayra Trust Network. You have to have somewhere neutral to actually do the hard work of figuring out the business, the governance, and the tech. They also knew that Ayra needed to get started quickly, that they needed to get started quickly. And they're also the kind of people who are leaders, and they actually, when they see that change is required, they tend to lean in and start working on things immediately. And they also wanted to be at the table here. So here's a quick update on where we're at today. We're working on 3 different fronts. We're working on the formation of trust clusters. I'll speak to that in a little more depth. We're deploying and scaling out, not scaling, deploying the digital trust infrastructure so that our members can hit that in the sandbox, and then moving quickly into operational pilots and proofs of concept. And it's key that you understand we're talking about real business operations, not sandboxing and playing. We're talking about real, what's the business case? How do we start actually going to live production on things? On the cluster side, I'll dig in a little bit on here because we have some updates to folks, and we've been getting a lot of questions about what does a cluster mean. But the idea behind a cluster is it is a group of multiple types of stakeholders who are working together. And I'm going to give you a working example of one that we're working on. We're not certain it's going to form, but it's looking pretty good. Where they're working together to start to really look at the business governance and technology problems they're facing, the opportunities they have in front of them, and they want to work together, and they need somewhere to do that. What they're doing is taking a look at and prioritizing and addressing the actual pragmatic. When I say pragmatic, I mean something we can do very, very soon, the business cases. They also are working to provide operational proofs of concept. And the goal that they have is to enable shared trust within their own cluster, depending on what industry they're in. They may cross industries, but they know that they're going to unlock new opportunities as well as, reduce costs on existing things. The infrastructure work we're working on really gets into a few different things. We're working on trust registries, we're working on our conformance test suite, and we're working on our type catalog. The goal there is we want to have the network form, connect the ecosystems together, and prove that those connections are working well. There's 3 main components there, as I just mentioned. The Trust Resi fabric really is managing who's in the Ayra Trust Network. This is the who you can connect with. There's also the conformance test suite, which is about validating, make sure that the connection from A to B is working and fits the actual, what we actually specify. This is how I'm connecting. And then we have a market and marketplace, the type catalog, which really provides discovery and availability of information that you are willing to provide or willing to consume and pay for it. This is really the what and the why you're connecting to the network. So launching pilots and POC, so we're working towards in each cluster as they form, making sure that we're focused on those pragmatic business cases that can actually go to a real, demonstrable business case. We want to make sure on the business side that the business rules are understood and they're mapped into the ecosystems, that the governance is there to align the ecosystem governance, because we may be dealing with many ecosystems, but that those also fit with the Ayra principles and the Ayra Trust Network requirements. And on a technical basis, we want to make sure we've established those credential families that are unique to a particular ecosystem. They may be broad and applicable across multiple ecosystems in that cluster. We also want to confirm the conformance that how I'm connecting to you is actually working. We want to establish the trust registries, who is in this particular area. So I want to dig in a little bit more on the Ayra trust clusters, what they are, and what it's all about here. Because really what Ayra is about is really three things that we're here to do. One is we're here to convene. We're here to bring together many different stakeholders, very different disciplines in a particular area, to make sure we really understand the business, the governance, and technical needs and opportunities. We also are here to facilitate so that we have the expertise on hand to make sure that, where there is that thin layer that is Ayra that helps us connect, that we can make sure that we understand how to help a cluster with the business, governance, and technical things that it needs in order to connect to, as well as thrive in the Ayra Trust Network. And we're also here to drive. We're here to drive along with our members. We're not just here to manage a project. We're not here to administer a project. We're here to help drive towards results so that we can see what are the patterns in a particular cluster. How do they apply to other places? How do they become global in nature when appropriate? That's our job. What we're finding is clusters are really typically involving at least one, but usually more than one ecosystem. Because what we found is the clusters are bringing together many different stakeholders. I'm going to give you a working example in a moment about the US banking industry. But because there's multiple stakeholders, there's a natural tendency that they're working in different realms. They have different ecosystems. An ecosystem is very small in our world of Ayra because they're actually composable. We can actually start linking these together because we're not trying to do too much. We're focusing on them as what is unique about that particular ecosystem. Ecosystems as well might be in many, many different clusters. You're going to hear a little bit about the Swiss EID system and how Switzerland is dealing with things. You can imagine that the government's backed ecosystem touches many, many, many different areas. And there's many clusters that it touches as an example. So again, our role as a neutral forum, we're a convener where we bring together leaders who want to operate and know that they operate in a multi-stakeholder ecosystem. We're also that facilitator to make sure this multi-stakeholder problems are being solved, as well as moving towards operational solutions. And we're also a driver of results, especially when things need coordination. Our members are very, very busy. Most leaders are. What we're finding is we're helping them drive because sometimes our projects that we're working on together are on the side of their desk. They're critically important, but they're one of many things they need to do. So we help to actually drive and make sure that we're actually pushing things forward when no one else can. To let you know how we're doing this, we're looking at this as a project approach. And if you're familiar with groups like the Eclipse Foundation, the Linux Foundation, they have things called projects where they get focused efforts. So we're working towards that. Talk a little bit about that now. But the reason for projects is really taking a really focused effort, but it's also making sure that it's resourced to meet the needs of a particular cluster. And we see two main kinds. These are member-led clusters. This is business areas that are really critically important to the members, but there also are some Ayra-led, and we're calling these projects because the members are the clusters, where Ayra may be the one that needs to lean in and lead as the primary goal, But we're working carefully to make sure that that's appropriate, that Ayra is the right body to help lead, but also to deploy some of our membership funds to do that work. We imagine we're going to be doing 2 to 3 projects in 2025. So we're in a bit of looking at a number of them, and they're not all likely going to get done or started even, but we're looking at the following. Oh, sorry, I want to talk about how these interact first. So the idea is that as we work through a particular project, whether that is focused on a particular industry, and it's a cluster that members are driving, or something that Ayra is doing for the community, that we're learning from these because they influence each other. Ayra operates, and our main focus is on what is truly needed at a global level. Projects are focused on, so let's say, I'm going to show you an example of the US banking industry. There are patterns in that US banking industry that will be relevant on a global basis, but a lot of it is very, very US banking centric, and it needs to be focused that way. These learnings, we want to make sure that we don't lose them, that they start reinforcing. What have we learned at the global level so that the clusters don't have to relearn? What have we learned in the clusters and projects that we can actually use at the global level so we can actually start sharing that more broadly? And how these are going to operate is we're looking and wanted to make sure people understand Ayra is a very, very open organization. That doesn't mean that everything we're doing is completely public. One of the things we've learned is some of the early ideas. Anyone who's working in early stage idea projects is ideas are fragile and treated privately, but Ayra is a public facing open organization. We need to quickly transition from what we would call exploration. Hey, a member wants to explore a particular area. Great, but we need to quickly get to the point where we go back to the community in a public manner to say, we need to present this to the members and see what it is and which members are interested. We propose that. We start developing to make sure a cluster makes sense. It makes sense for the members to contribute to. It makes sense for Ayra to provide support and contribute to, and then transitions to execution where a lot of the work happens. But I just want to make sure people are aware that some of that is happening by no means behind closed doors, but it's happening in a respectable, respectful way. All of it's going to be transparent once it opens up, but there are some discussions happening right now that are private in nature, but quickly moving towards, and we will not stay in the private. If something stays in the private, it may just didn't work, didn't go anywhere. Fine, nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with proposing an idea and putting the idea aside because it wasn't ready. So the clusters are really forming right now. I'm going to jump through these slides here because I didn't do the build properly. But on the industry side, we're seeing on member-led side, we're seeing a few different things. And I'll talk a little bit more about the financial services, specifically US banking, because we're working with a group, and I'll explain what it is we're doing, what kind of folks we're working with and looking there. But financial services is quite open for this. We're looking at banking and insurance. On a sustainability front, there's many different plays that are coming up. And really, for Ayra to pursue that one, we need some leaders to step up and say, this is critically important to me, and I'm going to help resource, I'm going to help work on it. And then we have workforce credentials, which actually a lot of our members are very active in what we would call high certification industries. Are you really a doctor? And do you have an infectious disease specialization that is valid in the United Kingdom? Are you a nurse in the United States and you have the following qualifications to get in? Both of those industries have delays of actually moving talent inside their own ecosystem that is measured in days and weeks and really should be minutes and hours. It's just ridiculous what's happening there. On the Ayra-led side, you're going to be hearing more in the next few weeks probably about the first-person credential. This is one of the ways of dealing with an AI threat. It also deals with the proof of personhood. Those deep in the SSI, self-sovereign identity space, decentralized world, will recall in August a major paper was dropped, and it started to deal with if we don't solve the proof of personhood problem, we're going to get stuck. We're also working with some of our members right now on what would an organization ID, an org ID project look like that helps us with cross-ecosystem recognition of organizations, as well as cross-border trust. And we're also hearing right now that AI agents, how do I know that that agent is acting for me? How do I know the agent is acting for that particular company? Or am I just dealing with an automated, unauthenticated scammer who's trying to just take me to the cleaners? want to speak to an example. I'm not going to name any names other than who helped put this together. Amit Sharma from Finclusive, Peter Martin from Fireblocks, and the Ayra team. Actually misspelled Ayra there, my bad. And again, you'll hear this convene, facilitate, and drive initiative. Because what we were doing was convening 5 different stakeholders. The actual financial institutions themselves. We had very senior leaders, ranging from CEO to again, senior leaders in the actual institutions. We had many different systems integrators who were providing the deep technical platforms and integration services that financial institutions use. We had law firms who represented, work with the financial institutions with regulators. And we also had core providers. The US is, I don't know how unique it is, but there are 3 main providers of technology that provide the vast majority of the banking core technologies and all of their other systems, loan origination, capital markets, compliance. They were all in the room along with the regulators to basically start talking about what are the problems. I'll give you an example of one problem that a regulator raised. There's a concern that, compliance costs continue to rise. They're not necessarily related to the size of your organization. And as those costs rise, what has happened in the United States, at least, they used to have just over 10 years ago, over 10,000 credit unions. I believe the number now is 3,500. They've lost almost 2/3. A lot of that is because the cost of compliance gets so high that they either close up shop or roll up into another institution because it's impossible for them to succeed. Our job there as a facilitator really was to go through many, many, many use cases. And when I'm saying use cases here, we're not talking about technical use cases. There's definitely technical involved, but this is about the business, the governance, and the technical things that are needed to really understand, the business and governance requirements as well as the opportunities supported by the tech. We were looking at individual things like KYC passporting, which is now a regulated need, and how are institutions going to meet that? Overall, anti-money laundering compliance, onboarding, open banking, many, many different areas where there's many different business cases that we're looking to explore with this group. And our drive right now, what we're doing as far as driving that is working with several of the folks who were in the room and identifying who are the folks who have enough belief that 1, there's a problem they can start to solve, and 2, that they are a leader who should be a first mover on this and wants to lean in and start developing this work. Our job in this case is to support and in some cases co-lead, but largely provide the business governance and technical expertise, not just project management stuff, but that actual expertise to see how it is we pursue any of the particular business cases that this cluster wants to pursue. And what we're looking at is, as we look at what the path forward is, we believe that as we do more of these clusters, and even inside of a cluster, as there are more business cases, as more business cases are added, the business value starts to increase. We're seeing that the folks who are leaning in, they're the kind of person who typically are what we call first movers. When they see an opportunity, they naturally start working towards taking advantage of the opportunity, solving the problems that they have, as opposed to waiting for other folks to do things. I'm going to skip past this a little quickly, other than to say, people are looking at these clusters as, again, they want demonstrable business cases. They believe internally into themselves that there is a competitive advantage to being at the table. They want that seat at the table, but also they're the type of person who leads by example, meaning if we're going to go as an industry to solve something, they're one of the people who does go first. I'll pass by quickly that, how do you learn more about Ayra? And Drummond and I will talk a little bit in just a moment, but we're looking for those first movers. If you want to reach out, you'll see this same link and QR code later when we have our panel. I'll have that up in case you wanted to shoot that. And Drummond and I like to talk a little bit, Drummond, if you could speak to the white papers that we've got. I'll open this up, Drummond, because you haven't seen the slide, I don't think, before. But we have 4 new papers that we produced and released last week. Drummond was the main conductor and often orchestra of these papers. And Drummond, did you want to maybe jump in, and I will have a glass of water here?
Yeah, definitely have a nice big glass of water there, Daryl. Thanks for the overview of all this. Yeah. we did do a lot of work, and I want to credit many contributors to these white papers. It was a fabulous experience working with the entire Ayra community to have multiple rounds of feedback. All of these papers, with the exception of the introduction to Ayra, is a short overview and specifically gets very quickly to, all right, what's the problem, what's the solution, and then trust clusters, and it focuses on the 6 overviews of the 6 trust clusters that Daryl just talked about. And so it's really designed for a business audience to very quickly address, here's what Ayra is doing, this is the problem we're solving, and this is the trust clusters that are forming to make it real out in the world. So that's the that is our introduction paper, as it says. Now, the other 3 all go much deeper into specific areas of explaining and answering a lot of questions about Ayra. The ecosystem of ecosystem paper, which the full name of which is the ecosystem of ecosystems model for decentralized digital trust infrastructure. And that's a mouthful, but it's about a 20-page paper whose purpose is to explain that mouthful and really explain, why do we need this layer of infrastructure to solve digital trust at scale? And why is the model like DNS? And how is it different than DNS? So it is written for audiences, both technical architects, but also anyone who's developing internet policy. Policy that about how are things working on the internet as a whole. And they're seeing Vicky here. There are concepts and diagrams that explain the ecosystem of ecosystems model, because we're now seeing that happen, spontaneously. This is how this kind of infrastructure will happen, is happening out there. And the basic concept of a digital trust ecosystem is that's where you have issuers, holders, and verifiers of verifiable data. What we're mostly focused on today is verifiable credentials, but we believe this will expand and grow outward to all forms of verifiable data exchange that are not just credentialized, right? You want to have verifiable data flow in all kinds of places, supply chains and multi-party data sharing. And so every one of those that has a trust registry, so you can verify who is an authorized issuer, who is an authorized verifier, what are the rules of the road. Those digital trust ecosystems, in order to connect and talk to each other and share data across ecosystems, that's what Ayra infrastructure is all about. And this paper explains, again, why that model, how much is it like DNS? However, DNS is hierarchical and solves a very specific problem with mapping names to IP addresses and other information specifically about typically a device. And with digital trust, we're talking about being able to not only discover information, but then get authoritative answers to who is authorized to do what in what ecosystem. And so that's what that paper covers. Now the third one listed goes into a very important capability that we think is possible with a decentralized trust registry network like Ayra. Daryl, do you want to do any sharing of any of the diagrams from within that? I have them up if you want to do that, or do you just want me to talk to it?
Decided to hit mute. Let's you and I talk about the principles behind the network effects in a moment. And
Sure.
then perhaps pull up the diagrams.
Okay. The core concept is that we have 3 levels of credentials that you can share in with Ayra infrastructure. ecosystem-specific credentials are designed for a specific ecosystem, and really will they might, but they're not really intended to have value outside of that ecosystem. Example I use is in Bhutan, they already have the National Digital Identity Infrastructure. They have 20 different credentials designed for citizen interaction with government. The foundational identity credential, that could have very wide utility, but you know, a Bhutan fishing license is you know, mostly going to be usable just within that ecosystem. The next level up of clusters we've been talking about, clusters are ecosystems that share common requirements for establishing digital trust relationships. And that's where you get cluster-specific credentials, whether it is financial services or travel or healthcare or education, whatever it is. Clusters get together to say, hey, let's agree on the credential family and the governance for that and the trust registries we need to join those ecosystems so that those credentials have maximum utility across the entire cluster. The highest level, the most generically applicable credentials we call the Ayra network credentials. Those are designed for any ecosystem who has the utility. They address the most fundamental elements of establishing digital trust relationships, which you've already talked about earlier, Daryl. Organizational ID for legal entities, what we call community ID for entities that are not legally formed entities, but still are referenceable communities that develop, you know, that have membership and develop trust is extremely important. And then, of course, individuals. And for individuals, we have a very specific proposal called first-person credentials, which is an answer to the growing, very quickly growing need to have a proof of person or often called proof of humanity that is highly privacy respecting and yet very widely accepted. So, and they also cover a fourth category, what we call verifiable relationship credentials, which are fundamental to the whole infrastructure. So it explains those and then the projects that we intend to bring up around those network, Ayra network credentials. And the name of the paper comes from the fact that we then conclude with explaining the 4 different compounding network effects that come when we have this our overall architecture for the network and for the network Ayra network credentials. And that's pretty much the summary I can give you. Now, Daryl, I don't know how deep the special network effects also, I think it's 20 or 21 pages. They're pretty accessible. The Ayra technical white paper is about 50 pages. There's a lot of technical meat behind all of what we've talked about, but it is designed for developers and architects that really want to go and say, okay, how is this thing going to work? And the different components, as you said, the trust registry, meta registries, conformance test suite, Ayra interoperability profiles, and the Ayra type registry. So that's a high level overview. Daryl, where do you want to take from here?
So what I wanted to do, Drummond, was perhaps you and I'm just recalling, as the community can probably imagine, this GAN phase 1 6-month effort has been really, really intense. And it was interesting in December as we were going to sign the founding of Ayra, the Ayra Association, how things kind of culminate. And I recall, Drummond, you and I walking around Zurich. We were walking around the lake principles behind the credentials that we're talking about, the Ayra network level. So what I wanted to do was just bring up the all of the principles, and maybe you and I can talk quickly through them. You know, why are all 7 of these things important, but also how do they reinforce each other so that people understand? And what I have found to those 4 papers that you just listed, Drummond, what I've been dealing with, especially in Davos, when I'm dealing with senior leaders, you know, CEOs, the introduction to Ayra is very, very helpful. And this network effect is really starting to help them understand the model. behind it. And they start to see themselves. Perhaps you and I could just riff on, why are all 7 of these special network effects, the principles behind them, why are they so important for us? So for me, for example, I look at global interoperability. I mean, I just want things to work everywhere. But what's special about an Ayra network credential, Drummond, on a global interoperability basis, in your mind?
Well, they are the credentials. When we think about digital credentials and the ones we put in wallets today, and I'm talking about digital wallets we have on most smartphones, like the Apple, Google, or Samsung wallets. We know that if we put a credential in there, such as a credit card, it's going to work everywhere those networks work today, right? They are designed for a network, and they will work everywhere that network exists. That's what the Visa and MasterCard logos are for. What we're after with the Ayra network credentials is the same thing. We want that credential to be something where if you see the Ayra logo someplace, you will know, oh, okay, I should be able to interact with this site or app or service with an Ayra network credential. That's why there's a very small set that address these very global things of proof of an organization, a community, or a person. That's the way I would, and therefore they have tremendous utility, but really at scale. But they're pretty thin in terms of how much you can do with them. As just as is a credit card, a debit card, you can do a monetary transaction, but you can't do many of the other things, of course, that all these other credentials are going to do. That would be my summary of the first of the 7 principles.
Cool. And the way I look at this is that we've had a lot of questions on, well, is Ayra trying to, be the network of all networks? And the answer we've got is really no, in that on a personal front and on a business front, the following analogy really kind of works. On a personal front, we can take a look at my passport is globally interoperable. It has it is also globally governed, but it is very, very rich and very, very specific in use. And this is not the role of Ayra to work on trying to replace something like a passport on an individual basis. We're more like a business card in that I hand you a business card, you take it, you do with it what you will. It's your job to take a look at my business card and say, hey, I'm going to take Daryl's address, take his email address, my phone number, company name, and then do with it what you will and maybe establish a connection. That's the role really of Ayra. I may on this business card have a way of pointing to my digital passport that you can then, if you're eligible to use my passport, use it, but we're not changing anything with regards to the passport. I was dealing, Drummond, with, we were visiting on the last week when we announced things. Alexandre, the CEO of GLIFE, Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, refers to what they're doing is really providing a organizational passport. So same thing. They do the detailed work. We're working on an organization credential that's more like a business card, so I can introduce a company, share a little bit of information. That's the simplicity thing. And it can point to that organizational passport. Drummond, why do you think global governance is critical for these Ayra network credentials? What's the why behind that?
That's the simplest question to answer. You can only have a credential. So one important point about number 1 is Ayra association. Okay, what we're talking about here, the actual Swiss association, a membership association, we don't issue those credentials. We do, if anything, we're going to have a very small our own ecosystem, which is just for our members, for our membership management. But the credentials we're talking about here are issued by Ayra recognized ecosystems, clusters, individual ecosystems, all of them. What we're doing is we're essentially saying, hey, there is a credential, and here's the governance for it. Here's the requirements around issuance, the requirements around verification, requirements around certification. That is what we're standardizing for this small set of credentials. And I would basically say you're only making global interoperability for that small set of credentials if you have global governance, which those ecosystems, those clusters opt into. There's no, oh, you have to do this. There's simply, oh, we want the value of those credentials. Yes, we will agree to make sure that our issuers and our verifiers will comply with that governance. This is why, all of this, Daryl, is an advertisement say, hey, these are this governance will be designed in these projects that we're creating at Ayra. So anyone in any of those ecosystem clusters saying, this would be really useful, that's why we want you to join that project and help make sure that the outcome, not just the technical design, but the governance meets your needs and your requirements.
Yep. Thank you. And then also the reason I like on the simplicity side, the reason I like the business card analogy is we all know what to do when I'm handed a business card. It's really, really quite simple. It also, if you're a data nerd like I used to be, or I guess I still am, there's a limited amount of stuff in here that I can do. I can only do so much with a business card, which forces me to be simple and move the complexity and the complicated work that needs to happen into the ecosystem where it matters more. That's one of the things. Would you add anything more to simplicity, Drummond?
I think you've put it perfectly. It actually also perfectly explains extensibility.
Yeah.
I love the extensibility of a business card, right? I can, okay, I've got this space to work in, but hey, I want to add a special logo. Or I want to add my own QR code. I want to add some special information about my business or my professional status, whatever. That's the same design. Keep the base really simple, make it extensible in a standard way, and you maximize the utility of something that can be used very broadly.
Right. So that I think covers off extensibility well. What about the privacy preservation and progressive disclosure side?
Yeah, I think we can all agree that applies primarily on the, if we think of the, business community and individual stakeholders writ large, this applies primarily to individuals. But I think we can all agree it's a critically important thing if we're going to have digital credentials that work at scale for individuals. They're going to need to be very privacy preserving and enable progressive disclosure of information, just like you talked about, Daryl, that you should be able to actually, I used to love my mother used to, when I got into this business, and we worked on electronic business cards. That's how I first got into this whole industry. My mother was proud of showing me her debutante card. She was a debutante in Seattle, and it only has one thing. It's just got your name. That's it, right? That was all. It was literally the fact that you use that, and they gave those out to the dances they went to, at the debutante ball, when they wanted to continue a relationship with someone, right? And I love that because obviously anything that's coming after that, it follows on, but that's all it had was your name. So if we are able to establish this pattern that you don't need to be asked for a lot of information as individual. In fact, the ideal thing is you can do something as simple as proof of personhood, but still establish a trusted relationship with a business or a community. Then you've set up a much healthier privacy pattern. And of course, someone like Vicky can tell us a lot more about what that means, in an ecosystem like the EU.
Yep. And then you're using the phrase in the paper of minimal viable friction, because we're our initial name, Global Acceptance Network, was all about how do we start that acceptance process. And again, acceptance in this world is I can present information to you. I can give you this card. You decide whether you're going to accept it in any way, shape, or form, whether you're going to believe it in any way, shape, or form. But how does the minimal viable friction help there?
The bottom line is all the value of all of these credentials depends on where they can be accepted and what they can be accepted for. So at the level of Ayra network credentials, we want to make it as easy as possible for relying parties, also called verifiers in the decentralized data world, to say, these credentials are out there. I'm going to start accepting them. Because for whatever business problem, like you said, if they start to accept that very simple business card credential, for instance, from individuals, then it opens up that it literally opens up a channel now, and you can start down to richer credentials and to trusted relationships verified. So it's all about, it's really, that is the part about what we're doing, Daryl, that I feel is the closest to what the payment networks put in place, right? They were all about how do we not only standardize acceptance, but then get it to work across all the different what were independent bank issued card systems that didn't work together. And they realized, hey, if we create Visa, MasterCard, now we can all, everyone will benefit because it's just a lot more value. That's a network effect right there.
Yep. And I'll take on number 7, because number 7 really is about how it's designed as a family. And to get into that one, you really need to look at the paper or visit with us again when we actually go deep into this special network effects paper. But the whole idea there is you have, as an individual and as an organization, these credential types are meant to work together. We have relationship credentials that says I'm an employee of this company, I'm a customer of this company, I'm an organization that has a relationship with another organization, but they play together. I wanted to just jump in and get through a few things about what just happened in Davos so we can get to our panel, where we're going to have a little more open discussion. You'll hear a little less of my voice, hopefully. So I just got back from Davos. Wanted to cover off a few things, a few themes that we came across there. One is that pretty much every conversation we had related to the multi-stakeholder nature of what people are doing, meaning they're dealing with people who are not typically in their ecosystem. They have a lot of stuff they're doing for themselves, but they have to work with others, and they're recognizing that it's not their problem to solve. They need to work with the folks who are solving those other problems. Another was Daniel Sauberly and Daniel actually went into the Sustainable Development Goals tent and was working with and talking to multiple different players, from large corporates through to individuals, activists, and philanthropies, on what it is that they are seeing and hearing and how the Sustainable Development Goals really tell the story. I think that aligns really well with what we're doing at Ayra, especially if I take a look at our what's happening in the sustainability cluster. I want to cover off 2 more things here in a little more depth, which is the Swiss Financial Innovation Desk find, and I'll cover these in a second, as well as the Open Wallet Foundation and forum that happened. So on Tuesday nights, there was an announcement by the Swiss Financial Innovation Desk that announced their 10-year program for financial innovation for Switzerland as a country. They looked at 4 distinct trends. One is AI, another is quantum computing, another is digital assets, but the 4th one, which I found most interesting given what we do, was, can Switzerland become a leader in digital trust? Meaning, can Switzerland as a country get ahead and leap ahead of folks to say, if you're building digital trust infrastructure, Switzerland is the place to do it, place to come up with it, to design it, to build it, and to operate it. And I think that's something that's really critical. We contributed to the actual paper itself. We were in Singapore at one of the functions, and we happened to be there, so we jumped in and helped out along with some other folks in the industry. But what's also interesting is Ayra itself was called out in the paper itself. This is just literally what it looks like in the paper. I'll just pull this up while I speak to it, the actual text, and we are mentioned elsewhere in the document. But this really highlights that people are looking and watching about what we're doing. In that, I guess they found out a week and a half before that we were changing names, right before they went to press. But they understood, that we are focused on that real world adoption and the real world scaling of trust ecosystems. And we're focused on that practical implementation, both cross-border and cross-industry. And we're going to speak to both cross-border and cross-industry when we get into our panel discussion. But that was really interesting that paper dropped, and it is quite a good thought piece, and we had a role to play in it. We also, there was two different sessions run by the Open Wallet Foundation. I'm going to cover off two of them. One of the two themes that they ran through. One was, and this is where we're working to partner with Open Wallet Foundation and Open Wallet Forum, which is more of an organization. The forum itself is convening under the ITU, so it's part of the UN, and is really focused on the international collaboration that needs to happen, especially at the government level. So we had numerous folks talking. His Excellency Sali was talking about how South Africa is moving towards digitizing it, trying to digitize things, and that there are over 2 billion people who do not exist in the digital world, and we're missing what it is that they could add to the world. We had the World Health Organization speaking to the importance of interoperability, of how we share information being literally life critical. Samsung and Visa, Swisscom, Huawei all spoke to how the payment networks, how the telecom networks cannot exist without the open standards, but also the open collaboration of governments to make sure that they're setting the policy things and that the industry is doing the things it needs to do to implement and make those policies real, to realize the benefits of the real interop. On the standards interoperability side, you're going to hear from Vicky. Vicky was one of the panelists in Davos, and we heard from multiple different groups that we're already working with. Daniela from Linux Foundation, Gail from OpenID, Mike Milinkovic from Eclipse. Obviously, Vicky's on that name. These are groups that are working on the standards and interoperability technical work that's necessary to complement that government facilitation and government regulation and government-to-government conversations that are happening to set the policy cover so that the standards and interoperability folks can actually come and meet the business needs that are out there. So it's a really powerful set of sessions that was run at House of Switzerland. And it was nice to see that, probably by nature of who was invited to some extent, but there's nobody who thinks they can solve the problem all themselves. And it was interesting how Ayra had a potential role to play with many, many different ecosystems that were live there. So I wanted to just jump into starting up our panel discussion. I'll give a really quick intro, and then you'll hear from our panelists who really, they don't need a lot of intro, but I feel like I want to, because I've known these leaders in many different forums, some recent, others I've come across in my life or learned of them, and I'm pleased that they are part of, and many of these folks have been part of our the GAN Member Advisory Committee, our GAN ambassadors. And we'll be discussing a few things that relate to where they are, what they're doing, but also how these themes may, how these may link with some of the themes that we came across at Davos. So we got Vicky. Vicky is Trust Services Director at Intesi. She's also president of the Cloud Signature Consortium. Vicky's been around. I've known Vicky for several years through Trust over IP. We met finally face to face, I think, in Berlin last year as we were starting GAN, and then we saw each other quite a bit in Davos. Hilda has a very short bio here. Hilda wrote her own software at one point, is CEO of her own fintech, has had exits, and she is operating a fintech, and she'll speak to it. But she operates in Kenya and other countries in Africa, providing loans to businesses and more. She's just an incredible person to work with. Anushka, I have known as a force of nature. And she's been around the self-sovereign identity, and also blockchain, but working with various initiatives from banking initiatives through to initiatives on a global basis. And she's very, very active in Cape Town. They are all coming in remote. I did see Vicky, but she has returned back to Milan and is trying to convince me to visit Milan in the summer. We've also got here in the room, well, Daniel has not showed up. He's got DDAS is having a meeting somewhere. He will drop in. Andre is here, and Dr. Andre Kudra is one of our founders. Andre has been involved in the decentralized identity world for a long time. As CIO at eSatis, he's also involved with another one of our members, which is an ecosystem, which is Ingo. Ingo is focused on providing, as I mentioned, high priority credential access for construction sites across Europe. So they're working on large construction sites to make sure that people are compliant. Daniel Salverly is involved with DDAS. He's an advisor to multiple different government groups, including, and DDAS was created out of the initial round of, and Ralph Rauschenbach is just walking in. DDAS was created right around the time that Switzerland was going through. We're speaking about you, Ralph. Welcome to the room. Ralph just got back from Davos. He's with, is it Ministry of Justice or Department of Justice?
Federal Office.
Federal Officer. But what's interesting for me is back in 2020, Switzerland went through an electronic ID, a digital ID initiative. It was passed through Parliament and through their referendum process, which from time to time engages and overturns parliamentary decisions. My understanding is those decisions are usually fairly close, 51-49, 55-45. But this was an overwhelming rejection of what was effectively privatizing what government realizes its role in the electronic ID, and we'll be speaking a bit more to that. But if I'm just going to pull up, I got to find my mouse. I have 3 monitors going here, so I'm a little, and I got Zoom covering everything. Excuse me. So I wanted to just jump in, perhaps, and perhaps ask Vicky. Vicky, you're really active. In Davos, we heard about at the House of Switzerland, obviously the Swiss EID, the use and the broad EU EIDAS regulation was discussed on how the EU is becoming, in many ways, a forcing function. But how do you take a look at how EIDAS is affecting how digital identity works both in the EU and beyond?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here with Ayra and all the participants for this webinar. Well, EIDAS has a huge impact, not only to existing providers, digital identity providers, trust services providers, but also on the market in both sides, if we want. On one side, we are challenged to adapt to the new requirements on top of the existing ones, to adapt our services, to adjust them, to get recertified, to educate the market and our customers, but because those changes have an impact also on our customers. In the end, we have to explain them what are those changes, why do we adjust our processes in order to make them understand and to accept easily this transformation, because it will have a transformation impact also on their side. Then there are new services coming into play, the electronic attestation of attributes, the verifiable credentials, how do we call them in EU. Those will have a tremendous potential on the targeting new customers, but at the same time, I think that the market needs to understand the benefits, also needs to have a tangible value. Why do they accept those credentials? Why those credentials have the legal value, and where the trust comes from. And I think as you said, Daryl, nobody in Davos had the idea that can solve the issues alone. It is obvious that such a change requires a major effort, a collaborative effort from all the stakeholders, policymakers, the standardization bodies, and we are working as a standardization bodies, for instance, Cloud Signature Consortium worked to update the existing specifications for generation cloud-based signatures to be able to generate the signatures with the wallet. And it's an ongoing effort, and I expect to have this effort continuously for the coming 2 years at least, just to set the stage right, just to make the things right. Then, yeah, we need to work on parallel streamlines, on market awareness, on that, and that market awareness includes not only the private sector but also public sector. They need a lot of talks to understand and to trust the new ecosystem. How that would change. You have to apply for a work permit, for instance, and they are familiar as public authorities to receive a set of documents in certain formats and to upload those on their website and to sign and so on and so forth. Now everything will change with the wallet, right? So the public administration has a very clear deadline to start accepting the digital identity wallet, the European digital identity wallet, and the electronic attestation of attributes. They need to understand how to do that, how to trust that the credential that is presented now is trusted. No, so yeah, I think there is a lot to talk about that.
Hilda, one of the things, so I bumped into Hilda with a client who was at that time investing in her company Possession. Hilda, when I learned about how you were going through your KYC, KYB, your know your customer, know your business requirements and perhaps you can tell us what countries you're operating in and how onerous or how costly it is for you to operate in the current where we are. And this is global. A lot of us are on the paper-based level, but you're operating at a different level of what is this business I'm about to work with? Can you describe your process? And then we'll talk a little bit perhaps about how going digital may actually start to accelerate and make it easier for you to do business.
No, absolutely. Glad to be here. Of course, Ayra is really close to what we do at Possession, because we are not just building solutions for SMEs. We are building the infrastructure to include SMEs across Africa and leave no one behind. We've been doing this for 8 years, and this is actually the time we can say we're almost close to getting this infrastructure scalable across the markets we operate across East Africa and West Africa as we enter those markets this year. And the biggest challenge for the last 8 years that we continue to see as we try to include these excluded SMEs across Africa, because they are the backbone of any economy in African countries and even globally. But we continue to see they are excluded because of this particular root cause of information asymmetry when we move from one market to another. Kenya, I think we're very lucky to have M-Pesa. And even with M-Pesa, we still continue to see a lot of fragmentation within these SMEs that we serve. They are operating with antiquated processes. They're very manual. The list that they have in their shop is a book where they write their sales and all the records are in piles and piles of books in their shop. How do we digitize that data to give them a credit score? It's almost impossible to do that. And for the last 8 years, we had to start there to actually figure out How do we do it, even starting in Kenya, which is our headquarter market? And M-Pesa, of course, provided the infrastructure in places like Nairobi, in the urban places, but in the rural communities, we saw massive, massive gaps in terms of trying to include these SMEs into our ecosystem. Now, when we move from Kenya to Uganda, it's completely different. You know, SMEs don't have M-Pesa. And so we have to start on the ground to look at what are the ways we can educate these SMEs to implement and apply digital tools in their lives to start building their credit history. And so from one market to another, we've been really facing this challenge of bringing this information asymmetry, to a one place so that we can credit score these businesses and allow them to be included into the formal financial system. And so, how do we then solve this problem? But before we talk about the digitization, Daryl, I think it's really imperative to mention that what this problem of information asymmetry, which is really the root cause from one market to another, and there's no linear way of actually looking at it. And as I mentioned, we from one market to another, you'll think they're very similar in Africa, but they're very, very different. And that's really driven by mobile money penetration, the infrastructure that we continue to see. It's very fragmented, internet connectivity, the lack of electricity. In Kenya, for example, there's many, many places that still don't have the basics of electricity. So how do we expect to reach those SMEs without even those basics in their house? And so for us really is to look at this problem and say, how do we solve it in Pesesha in a way that starts to include these informal businesses, because they are the drivers of the GDP for the African economies. And the infrastructure side will definitely become a big, big challenge for us to do it by ourselves. Credit bureaus are not sharing data. We have 4 credit bureaus in Kenya, but all of them are really working in silos. They are not sharing any data. And so we are forced to bring all this data together within our infrastructure. And that's why we ended up building a platform called PataScore that helps us to credit score this business, KYC them from a centralized one source of truth. And then we can be able to give them credit. But just to wrap up, it's taken us 8 years, Daryl, and we are still figuring it out, how to really continue to include these SMEs. And it starts with that KYC. It's not centralized. Credit bureaus are not talking to each other. There's many, many underlying issues, that are really preventing these businesses to be included. And so it's going to take more than a village to solve this problem.
Thank you for that, Hilda. I definitely want to dig in a moment on what it is that you're based on. One of the goals we have is at Ayra is to influence digital public infrastructure to help make sure that we're getting in various different places the things that we need. Perhaps as we go through, I'll make a few notes, but I would like to revisit in a moment how you can play a role, because you're effectively creating the data that I know you're willing to share. That's the key thing that you pointed out. The credit bureaus, so they have the information, but they're not willing to work together. They're not willing to share and produce that backbone infrastructure. But let's deal with that in just a moment. I wanted to jump over to one of our in-room attendees. So as I mentioned, DDoS has been hosting a meeting, and it just ended, so we've had more people join the room. But Daniel, I wanted to jump back here to Switzerland. We have 2 individuals. Daniel is with president of DDoS, and Rolf, you're with I forgot it again.
Federal Office of Justice.
Federal Office of Justice. Rolf has been leading the Swiss EID initiative, and Daniel's part of DDoS. But perhaps Daniel, you could talk a little bit about, Rolf has created what I would call government ambition levels, meaning ambition level 1 and please correct me if I get this wrong, Rolf, is primarily federal. Ambition level 2 is about all of government, federal, canton, municipal, where it's government issue. But then there's ambition level 3, which is the rest of Switzerland, those things that aren't regulated, the business to business, business to person, people to people, but also external. Maybe you could explain how this is working and where you see ways for us to work together, Daniel, because and describe what DDAS is perhaps.
Yeah, very quickly. So DDAS is a multi-stakeholder organization in Switzerland that kind of brings together various thoughts and thought leaders, and actually making sure since 4 years that some of the most important principles find their way into an initiative that is exceptionally important for the Swiss people. And by the way, to just slightly correct you, it hasn't been Rolf who has said, this is the way we're going to do it.
Right.
It's actually the Swiss people that are directly in a direct democracy here in Switzerland, asking the government to implement things that are valuable for its society. So prior to this initiative, there was a previous initiative where there was a thought or a notion of private issuers of identity credentials. It was taken down. It was actually voted against in a referendum. And so parties across the country then started a motion of creating this next initiative that really should be based on Swiss values, ensuring privacy preserving mechanisms are employed, but also having the state as an issue of state identity. So with this, it kind of went on to its journey. And one of the earliest consultations that Rolf and his team has done, and he can maybe speak about it, how this came to life, was, do we actually want to only focus on digital identification, or do we want to create more value with digital trust kind of based services and infrastructures? And that's where the Federal Council was proposed to look at various options. Ambition level 1 was only issuing private national person identity through this Swiss trust infrastructure and being able to hold and verify on the basis of this trust infrastructure. And that would be it. Is it that what you want? Or in a consultative process, then was assessed, would it actually make sense for cantons, municipalities, and also the federal government to issue other verifiable credentials than just the electronic identification? Because there's a lot of friction that we can take out of processes in business to government and also individual to government interactions. And the third level of ambition that was formulated and put into consultation was, maybe we should even think beyond that and include the private sector and think about how can we enable the digital economy moving forward with those privacy and trust mechanisms to exchange data, verifiable data between various entities. So actually it was decided very early on that this digital economy kind of enabling factor would be meaningful, because also trust infrastructure is not cheap. A major investment for the country, major investment for various parts of the federal government. And it will also mean that cantons, municipalities, etc., will need to start working and implementing to work with these mechanisms. So I think it was just a wise decision to put it as broadly as possible. So maybe Rolf, if you can maybe.
No, I mean, to that point, you said everything that is relevant.
What I like about this is we've seen, so when I heard the story of how basically the Swiss citizenry rejected what happened in 2020. One, that's amazing. But two, it also shows, when we try to privatize something, we've also seen the other extreme where government tries to do everything. Switzerland's got this neat balance, which says, this is what we do as government. We enable, we're taking care of ourselves. We're doing the ID, we're doing the canton and some of the federal things that are also issued and controlled by government. That's in service to the citizen. It's also enabling people to build on top of that.
And
Does that make sense?
it's maybe also this network effect that you mentioned on top of digital public infrastructures like these, that where no private sector players will be investing because, you know, there is no immediate return for them. There is actually return for society. There is return for our economy. So I think that notion of building digital public infrastructures on which network effects can actually prosper and flourish is a very wise decision. And when you look at, so another point that I wanted to correct in your previous notion was it's not only for Swiss organizations, actually anyone in the world can actually onboard onto the Swiss Trust infrastructure and issue, hold and verify through that Swiss Trust infrastructure, kind of following some of the governance steps that are needed, obviously. And the important aspect then is, and that's where Ayra comes into the play, from my perspective, is when you adopt some of the things that the Swiss government is doing in regard to open source capabilities, putting the entire infrastructure out there into the world to be consumed. I think this is something that can be, you know, used or reused and then connected to each other, so we can build that ecosystem of ecosystems that you talk about, where sovereign states, sovereign organizations, even individual use cases or individual clusters or however you call it, can take some of that code or the code and then somehow connect to each other.
Yeah, just quickly to add that, we just had discussion about that because, you know, one of the fantastic things about the upcoming CEO infrastructure is the Trust Protocol. The Trust Protocol is all about using credentials to identify issuers and verifiers, which then actually gels in very nicely with your idea of Trust Registry Query Protocol.
Yep.
So I think, you know, I personally think that we as DDoS should advocate our colleagues at the Confederation to actually really embrace implementing and supporting Trust Registry Query Protocol, because that would enable Switzerland to lead, right?
Yes.
On the international scene, like, you know, we, especially when we go into ambition level 3 credentials.
Yep.
Like Swiss companies start issuing stuff that is made trustworthy by the governance in the infrastructure, and through your Trust Registry Query Protocol, other people can start accepting these credentials outside of Switzerland, which gives a boost to your network, right?
It also dovetails into, we talked earlier about the release of the Swiss Financial Innovation Desk. Of those 3 areas, I look at the 4 areas they were talking about: quantum computing, generative AI, digital assets. Yes, Switzerland can play a role, but I think Switzerland has an outsized advantage in the digital trust realm.
Yeah.
There's a reason we were founded in Switzerland.
Well, we actually know that Swiss is not going to get enough GPUs now, so they might forget that.
Yeah,
We're going to fight for that.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I think Rolf, your perspectives on the Open Wallet Forum might also be interesting, because there was an important event yesterday. Did you already talk about that?
We talked a little bit about we talked about how the 2 different groups of both the forum side, the government, and then also the actual interoperability standard side. But I wanted to jump over to talk a little bit to Anushka, who is out of Cape Town. Anushka, you've been involved in initiatives that range from banking through to a wild range of things. Perhaps you could give us a little tale of what you've been seeing and where you see things going.
Thank you, Daryl, for inviting me to the conversation. And I'm really, really feeling privileged today to be with all of you here. So thank you so much for the opportunity. So I'm based in Cape Town, and I've got about a 6-year history in self-sovereign identity and digital identity here in South Africa and also globally, as I worked for Cardano and IOHK building out the Tala Prism protocol, which is now Identis, and it's open source. But in South Africa, you know, when we started this journey 6 years ago, the tech felt a little bit invisible or fragile. And, you know, forward wind 6 years down the line, I'm like, okay, so where are we right now? And the good news is that yesterday or 2 days ago, we had our first live use case announced in the public domain, which is an e-hailing application that was developed in South Africa, and it's going live now in February. And this is using verifiable credentials. So this is proving that the tech is there and that there are people out there that really want to feel like there is tech that enables a safer environment. And I had a call with the creators of the solution earlier today just to make sure I got my facts straight. And, you know, one of the biggest benefits here is that the taxi drivers are feeling even more secure than me as the passenger was feeling when I heard that they had the service. And one of the taxi drivers at the event actually said, I am so happy to know that I can verify the person jumping into my cab, knowing that I'm not going to get robbed of my cell phone, which is the main means by which I do my work. And for me, that was a fascinating quote that was shared with me, because I often think of self-sovereign identity and digital identity as, oh yes, I'm striving for this admin-free life because I really hate the admin we have to do and filling out my name, surname, ID number with every doctor, every organization, and I'm like up to here with it, and I'm quite short, so you can imagine how up to here I'm with it. But so we're seeing the first live use case out there. The next use case is going to be a call center authentication use case. And this will form the first ecosystem of verifiable credentials in South Africa. Onto that, we've got the South African Reserve Bank, and this is public knowledge, working on a pilot of a digital financial identity. The pilot is coming to a close and is being evaluated, and the implementation is planned to take place by middle of the year, like June, July or so. So things are moving, and this is like super exciting for me because, you know, while government's doing their thing and the big companies are doing their thing, I can see that the smaller businesses are starting to do their thing. And I'm really excited about also starting to do my thing, because I'm like, okay, so how do we enable more people to start up their small businesses using the same tech? So what I want to test now is, we know that the governance models and trust frameworks are coming in, and that's going to help a bit. But then what does that mean for the entrepreneur, right? How are we going to create more of those and enable more of those in a positive way, where the costs are not like, you know, saying to them, okay, you stay aside and do your hectic processes and the rest of the world will move on with more streamlined processes. So that's the next thing that I'd like to look at. And then one more use case that we're seeing coming out of South Africa that I'm allowed to share is, you know, we've got FICA and RICA. RICA for cell phones, FICA for the banking and insurance. So on the RICA side, we do have someone working with verifiable credentials for RICA with one of the big mobile network operators. And that should come to life sometime this year. We just don't have exact timelines yet. So from a South African perspective, we're seeing some movement and it's looking really promising. Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you, Anushka. Rolf, did you want to add something?
Yeah, and I would like to continue with South Africa in the beginning. As you just mentioned, there was this meeting in Davos, which the Swiss government has hosted, and we were very happy to have had also the honor to receive His Excellency Minister Solly Malatsi from South Africa, the Minister for Digitalization. And he was there for a number of reasons, but also because obviously this year South Africa has the presidency in the G20. And I mean, I cannot break you know, specifics, but it is the intention to somehow bring this whole topic of interoperability to the forefront, maybe also in the context of the G20. So let's see. And I think that it's very encouraging to hear that, you know, this obviously is the highest macro level you can imagine, but that at the same time also on the daily use case level, things are moving also in South Africa. That's very encouraging to hear. Okay, so that maybe as introductory remark. Now, going quickly back to Switzerland, I would like to make just two remarks. The first is, I mean, the Swiss approach was now praised a lot, and Daniel was right to correct that it is not my merit. And I would like to add simply that Switzerland does not have yet a law. Actually, the law was approved by the parliament and currently is in the phase of where people can collect signatures to trigger again a referendum. That is business as usual. That's part of our democratic system, and we will see how this all works out. I am confident, but at the moment, due to these circumstances, I will refrain from any further political comments on that topic, because we do not want to influence the political debate at that stage. But just so that everybody is aware, Switzerland has not yet a law, and things might go in one way or another. Yeah. So, but assuming that things work out fine, and you know, with reference to the comment of Vasily and our trust protocol and so on, and also the relationship with Ayra and other organizations which are operating, let's say, on a higher level in the stack, I would simply like to say that at the moment, Switzerland is trying to build up a solution which works in the first go only in Switzerland, not because we want to create a Helvetic island solution or anything, but just that's how we have to start as a sovereign country. We are very much interested in interoperability. That is why we are part of these discussions and why we have organized the event or co-organized the event in Davos. But it is also clear, you know, as a sovereign country, and when we put a stamp on something or a digital stamp in the future, that there are technical interoperability issues, and there are also regulatory interoperability issues, which need to be dealt with in appropriate processes and with maybe bilateral agreements between, for example, Switzerland and European Union. But these are still, you know, a few steps too far down the line to really say much. But we definitely are obviously working with open source, and things are already to a certain extent on our GitHub. A lot will follow very soon with a sandbox still in this first quarter, and everybody is very welcome to have a look at it, to use it. Just for international partners, Daniel said correctly that anybody can use our infrastructure, but I need to make a little caveat. We will have a two-level registration process, so to speak. That there will be a base registry, as we call it, where everybody can register its identifier and its cryptographic material on a self-declaration basis, just with a little fee. So there is no limit. But then the second stage is to actually get verified by the government in a, let's say, manual process to actually link a legal person with a identifier and its cryptographic material on this base registry. And there it is already not so easy to do it within the Swiss context. I understand that the SME reality in Kenya is a different one than in Switzerland, but still in Switzerland, not everything is perfect either. And if we would onboard then also legal entities from beyond, there things really get complicated. And at least in the beginning, I'm afraid that this will not be possible, or at least we have not yet come up with easy solutions. To what extent a infrastructure like Ayra can help, I don't know. Our infrastructure is open and Ayra can dock to it, no problem. Others can dock also. We don't have a specific preference. in that respect. We definitely want to be available to the world. We want to interact with the world. But just to state clearly that obviously there are a few baby and not so baby steps still to be done. To not get too euphoric right now, because then frustration would be just unavoidable.
Yeah, and Rob, I don't think this is different in the Europe and the European wallets, where they're focusing on their countries, and interoperability within Europe will be a challenge. It will take time. So they'll have to fix this, and we'll have the bilateral agreements. So it'll be maybe 2030 by the time we have kind of this maturity level. And there's a place for us here in Ayra to build the interoperability between those trust domains and real business cases. That's one we discussed with us earlier.
So I want to jump over in a moment to talk to both Anushka and Hilda, but Andre, you're kind of in the middle of all of this. You're based in Germany, Ingo is across Europe. You've been in this space for a long time. How would you sew this stuff together, and what's got you excited and concerned?
Yeah, and I also have the privilege to have a Swiss subsidiary, so we are active in the EU and in Switzerland, and we are intending to use all of that to make adoption a reality. So I'm in this thing now since 2015, when we call it still self-sovereign identity. Now we call it decentralized identity, and I have been bullish from the start. I said, okay, it's so obvious. This is something that this is so desperately needed. In 3 years, everyone will have wallets and verified credentials. And now we have 11 years later, or 10 years later, and we have been running marathon after marathon with heavy lifting in between. So I always felt the time is now, and I have the feeling again now. And when I heard about GAN, or Global Acceptance Network, and now Ayra, I said, okay, now finally we are getting a group together of people who want to make it happen. And we are all about adoption, and we want to make it happen. So we are a tech company with about 60 people. We have all the tech ready. We have deployed, I don't know how many pilot applications and so on. So we have everything. So we are really keen on making it work now and pushing it out into the field. And as you has mentioned, Ingo is one of our examples in the construction industry, where a couple of things come together quite nicely. We moved all the paper away, so efficiency got up significantly. They have huge compliance risk at their construction sites if the documents are not in order. So we reduced the compliance risk and also the fraud risk. So, and I think all these things can come nicely together. And we are now looking for finding similar things where we can throw the good solutions at. And with the help of Ayra, I'm really keen on finding them, and I'm very, very convinced I will do so.
Awesome. Hilda and Anushka, I'm hearing, when I look at where Ayra's headed, I mentioned, one of the goals we have is to help facilitate digital public infrastructure. Right now, if you look at the traditional world, and I'll just point to Canada and the US, we have credit bureaus, and that's how you get a loan. The US has codified things to the point that you have a FICO score that is, you can determine exactly how you got it. That's working to an extent, but many people in the US and Canada fall through the cracks. But Hilda, what I'm hearing from you is you have credit bureaus, yes, and that's traditional approaches, and they're not sharing. But what I think we're going to get to a point relatively soon when people are I know your business is making loans to people based on non-traditional data, and you're now willing to take that non-traditional data and provide a score openly. I have a feeling that that's going to become more of a norm, and that you're going to get a score that's based on not just on what your education was, what your driver's license number is, but actually what you've been doing and how you've proved the flow. How do you see yourself becoming part of that fabric, that underlying infrastructure that says, hey, you just met us, you've never done anything digital, but now you've worked for us for 6 months, and I'm now going to not only just serve you but I'm going to open doors for you. How do you see that working for you?
So that's a very good question, because it's been a journey, because we've been building this alternative data, not by ourselves only, but with partners. So one of the key partners that we work with here in Kenya is Safaricom. Safaricom is the biggest mobile network operator. So what we've done is we've basically integrated our APIs with Safaricom, and we can now start getting mobile money data. So all the M-Pesa data with the consent of the customer, we take it, we analyze it through our engine, and we're able to give a customer a credit score real time. And Safaricom, as we know, in Kenya is the monopoly when it comes to this data of KYC and where the customer is. So we've really had to do the hard job to access that data through regulation, a lot of compliance on top of it. So we've now built the rails, but it doesn't stop there. So we've had to really do a lot of standardization, and this is where now government comes in with their databases as well, to integrate with us, and then say, how do we complete this KYC picture of a customer? Now, the problem is, even the government, currently, they're working in silos. There's a lot happening. We have a portal called e-Citizen portal, but it's always down. So you really almost can't rely on it almost 80% of the time. And so you're left with just, looking at that rich mobile money data to say, here is the first entry to the door of accessing credit. And now let's financially educate you. So really, how do you start building your credit history? So imagine a world where these customers now have a wallet through M-Pesa and mobile money, because that's really what drives the African economy. And with their transactions, now you can start to tell them, hey, you can actually continue to build this credit history without having a bank account. And so we're training them on how to do that. We're helping them to digitize their business. So now they have transactional data that they are bringing to us real time. They have a point of sale that is linked to their wallet. They start to transact and sell through that point of sale. We start to accumulate that data on our engine, and they start to build their credit history purely based on their business transaction. And then we don't stop there. We tell them, hey, now you can actually own this data wallet and start improving your credit history before you grow up to go to a bank and ask for a bigger loan. And so the working capital starts to grow within Pesesha as they look at other avenues, even to go to the bank level. And so at that point, they then open a bank account. We bring their data, their bank transactions data. We combine all that data, plus everything we have from the government and all this alternative data, then gives them a credit history to start with, and grow up the financial ladder. So government plays a very big role to bring this trust. The regulators have given sandboxes. I think the benefit we've seen in some of these markets where we operate is the regulator has said, here's a sandbox. Can you experiment? Can you test? And how do we bring this one source of truth platform? And of course, Pesesha is building the rails. And the future is really what excites us, the power of open banking to open up our APIs, and everyone else can come in. All the digital lenders that we have in Kenya, more than 200 plus, they can now start to bring in their data so that we can actually start to build this digital credit history of alternative data and include these SMEs up the financial ladder. So it's possible to actually do it. It's gonna take a lot of collaboration from government to really bring the trust, from the regulator to bless all these endeavors, from the customer to be educated, to actually understand what is the reason why we are collecting this data, how can they be financially educated, and how can they continue to build their digital history to get a credit score up the Pesesha ladder.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Hilda. Anushka, you raised a really interesting point. And something that I think, even though a lot of us have been deep in this space, that, all of the work we're talking about is two-way connection. It's from me to the company, from the company to me. You're looking at making your life easy. We've been working with like Beckon Protocol in India, who's, doing hailing platforms. But I liked your message there that you want to make your life easy. You want to, to hail a car and know that the driver's probably receiving more. And that's typically how the Beckon Protocol is working. But makes your life easy to hail somebody. You feel good because they're getting more of the money. But on the other side, the driver is feeling safer. we forget the opposite side of these equations all too often. That's so. Where do you see, Anushka? Where do you see things going when you consider that side of it? That we forget about the other person, we forget about the company on the other side, or the company forgets, even though they want the relation with a customer, they forget that what they're thinking.
You know, Daryl, recently the universe has been sending me a few of these examples where, you know, we think it's about the customer or it's about the company, and we're looking at one side of the equation. And another example I would use is I had an insurance company phone me with a product, and I'm like, oh yes, if I tick this box, I'll get a bigger discount. This is so cool. And I'm busy playing this game, you know, they really got a whole gamification around their business. And so the call center calls me and I'm like, okay, I like this quote, but now I don't know whether I'm dealing with a scammer or a legitimate person, right? And so I call the organization and I say, hey guys, you know, someone called me, they've given me this quote, and I want to know if they're legitimate and they actually work for you. And the organization can't tell me.
Yeah.
But I'm stuck in the game. So I think where this needs to go is, you know, organizations typically use the excuse like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Who's on the other side of SSI? Why must we change? Why must we go that route? And then the customer is basically stuck with the products that organizations offer, right? And then you choose the best one that's going to help close a little hole in your life. And so I think once we make organizations or help organizations to understand the flip side and benefits for both parties, I think it'll help us to increase adoption. And I think in industries where current service providers are skeptical or disinterested or a monopoly, I really think this is the opportunity for startups, for new entrants in the space to actually go create the business, create something better, you know, and grow from there. You know, let the conglomerates do their thing. And eventually when people realize there's something better out there, they'll have a better product to choose from. So I think there's, you know, two ways of tackling a couple issues that I bundled in that whole story. And one is look for the collaboration, and the other one is, oh, well, let's try and start the next best product that we believe can be out there and offer it to customers, because customers are victims of what's out there. You know, so
I like
think,
that.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to the better world we're creating.
I like that. Customers are victims of what's out there. Vicky, I wanted to jump back to your thinking, especially on the EU and EIDAS 2, and especially the EU digital wallet. One of the things that I think when someone looks at EIDAS, there's a kind of a look at the, EU nation states are going to be issuing wallets and they're going to be putting the national IDs into these wallets. And that's a top-down view of things. Is there a ground up, a bottom up approach, which, you know, you were hearing examples of a lot of bottom up approach, you know, grassroots information flowing in. Does the EIDAS and the EU digital identity, the UD wallet, have the ability to participate in that way? I mean, to be filled with information that came from outside of EU nation states?
Well, this is a question that we are asking very much in different large-scale pilots where we are piloting the implementation of EUDI wallet. And you know that I'm involved in two of them, EWC and NoBit. And we are very much aware that the things are not going only top down, but is also the other way around. And yeah, government issued wallet and government issued credentials and so-called qualified electronic attestation of attributes issued are one side of this ecosystem, but it will be a huge one from the other side, coming from specific industry solving problems, credentials, for instance, that needs to enter into this ecosystem. For instance, credit score credentials, right? So I need this one. There are banks that are that will issue in form of verifiable credentials, these credit scores. How do we put them in a wallet? In which wallet? Do we use the national official digital identity wallet? Can we show that credentials, credit scoring to another banking financial institution? Do they accept that? How do they verify? And what are the mechanisms? And this is just one example, but will be an immense potential. And I think Ayra has a fundamental role, could play a fundamental role in this picture, because we have to connect the dots of trust, right? So I know this credential that I'm sticking now with a credit score example, but you can imagine any type of credential. So I know that this credit score is trusted because has been issued by this institution, but how the other part that needs to verify can check that that institution was allowed to issue this credit score. Not only that I'm the person who claims to be, because there are all sorts of verifications around. And we are working, for instance, in these large-scale pilots to build the trust framework, to see the trust list. Yes, will be a starting point, but for sure will not be enough to put everything together. So how can we work together to build this trust framework and to be able to be interoperable, not only in EU, but across geographical regions, right? Another point is that, okay, as an EU citizen, I have some credentials, but what is happening, and they are trusted and are issued by the government, but what is happening when I'm coming to Canada, for instance? How do they verify that? How do they know that, yeah, that is a legitimate credential and they can accept that, so they can make their trust based on that? And there are a lot of scenarios, if you want, that we are trying together to fix and to find some answers and solutions.
And as we discussed in Davos, as we heard in Davos, you know, in different countries, I mean, even in the United States, state to state mobile driver's licenses have totally different use cases.
Yeah, you see.
How do you know, does Canada recognize a digital driver's license? Here's a hint, no. So don't even try to do that, but then how do you start to do that? Daniel, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, just, I mean, maybe in addition to the conversation, also in Davos, I mean, there's so much geopolitical tension, there's so much AI blob, whatever, you know, comes our way, we somehow need to cope with it and put it in the right box and understand it, because it's such a lot that comes our way. Nevertheless, I think when we look at the complexities of the world overall, and if we reduce the problems that we have today already in the digital world to the minimal possible abstraction level, then I think identity is so key. Absolutely key. Identities and trust, identity for organizations, identity for machines, identity for natural people. It is the foundation to think through and ensure assurance in digital ecosystems. It's the fundamental basis.
Totally agree.
And when whatever we want to solve on top, we will be able to solve on the basis of that minimal abstraction layer. Then I think countries will solve digital identity. especially in global north countries, this will be a country level conversation. And I think, you know, banking the unbanked, as you beautifully explained, Hilda, in Africa, and the credit score, and really creating mechanisms, trust mechanisms for financial inclusion is absolutely key. But I think most, you know, when we think about the middle section and the forefront section of the short and the long tail, most of the countries in the world will solve identity as a national initiative. And I think when we think about Ayra, it really creates value in the day-to-day use of something simpler than digital identity, and something that really is not addressed by some of the country scope areas. And when, I mean, you mentioned it, Rolf, there will be legal contracts between needed for interoperability between Switzerland and the EU, etc. But we heard so many use cases today of the long tail kind of credentials that fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And that is so important that Ayra is kind of tackling those to create that interoperability between those ecosystems that will proliferate. Some of them will be solved by others.
Yeah.
There are clear areas where I think Ayra can significantly create global value.
I look at it, I think if we take an example of, you know, trying to do changing the world of loans in Germany, that's a really heavy lift, and Ayra really doesn't have much of a role to play there. But I'm looking at the more lightweight, I mean, Hilda, you've described ecosystems that are country by country different, but in essence, it's coming down to I, Possessia, have developed a credit score. You, Possessia, have developed a credit score, and I, as a lender, am willing to use that as a signal to make a loan. That's a nice and lightweight business level, and government has a role down the road to make sure that people are not being abused, that it's effective, and that it's on the right rail. But that's a lightweight thing that can be done. Trying to change fundamental structure is really, really brutal hard. And that's what I'm liking about what we're doing here with Ayra, is it's those pragmatic, smaller scale. Well, again, we're not going to change how the German national identity system works, but we're going to change how perhaps I could leverage the German national identity that comes out of an EU wallet to do other things. We're not going to change, and we're not here to try and change government. Drummond, you've been very, very quiet. I wanted to see if you had any sort of way to weave all of this stuff together. I didn't give Drummond a heads up, but I'm sure he's been doodling and thinking about how this all glues together. What are you thinking of what you heard?
You know how it glues together, Daryl? Through the chat room. I love the fact that at webinars like this, what you see in the webinar is only half of what's going on, because all the panelists are able to, you know, reinforce each other's points. This is an amazing group. I've literally taken a screenshot of this to share with some of the other folks, both in the you know, on the Ayra team, but others that are around the table going, wow, this is the conversation that we, you know, have created Ayra to have. I'm so glad Vicky, Hilda, Anushka could come. Martina's there, that I was able to meet, you know, at the Swissy ID event that the Rolf was hosted. That was a fantastic event, and you know, yeah, I wasn't at Davos, but I feel like we're pulling out the essence right here. I just think we've set the table now. Now we really have to start doing what it's going to take to build these clusters, build these credentials, and drive adoption. I'm super excited that you know, this year I really think we can, you know, if we have the same post Davos thing a year from now, I hope we're all telling stories about, wow, look what we actually were able to do in 2025.
And with that, I wanted to just extend a big, I guess we're past time now, but a huge thanks to everyone who arrived here in person, And especially those who scrambled home and came in from remote, Anushka and Hilda and Vicky, I know you just got home as well. You just got home from Davos. And I'm looking forward to, like Drummond said, whether it's in 3 months, you know, at the end of Davos next year, I'd rather talk in 3 months than in a year, to see what it is we can do, but also the things we just discussed here. I mean, I learned a ton. I just wanted to extend a big thank you to all of you. And maybe I think we can probably wrap things up, but and have yourselves an awesome weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very nice to meet you.
Have a nice
Bye.
weekend, everyone.